This past week was John 18 through 21, and I believe Luke 1. So I'm going to skip Luke, and we'll pick it up on next week, just kind of for context purposes. We'll just go through these 4 chapters and ask a few questions. All right, beginning with John 18, who led the band of men and officers that came to arrest Jesus? Judas, right. When the soldiers asked for Jesus of Nazareth, what was his response? In verses 5 and 6. I am he. What did Peter do to the servant of the high priest? Which ear? Yep, cut his right ear off. Right. Who was the first person Jesus was taken to after his arrest? Right. And I have trouble with that too. I go back and forth. There's an Annas, and we've got Ananias. We've got all these names. Here's another name too. What counsel did Caiaphas give concerning Jesus? In verse 14. Right. What did the damsel at the door ask Peter? Aren't you one of this man's disciples, right? And what was Peter's response? I am not. How did Jesus respond when questioned about his teaching? Verse 20. Hey, I've got nothing to hide, right? Okay, what did one of the officers do to Jesus after his response? Hit him with the palm of his hand, right? After questioning, who was Jesus bound over to then? Verse 24. Yep. What immediately happened after Peter denied Jesus a third time? Right, the rooster crowed as he was told. What accusation did the Jews initially bring against Jesus when Pilate asked in verse 30? What did they call him? An evildoer, right? And who the Jews asked to be released instead of Jesus? All right, John 19. What did Pilate do to Jesus before delivering him to be crucified? Had him scourged, yet. What did the soldier put on Jesus' head? And what did the chief priests and officers cry out when they saw Jesus? Crucify him, right. Pilate told the Jews to take Jesus and crucify him for what reason? Found no fault in him, right. What law did the Jews claim Jesus had broken that deserved death? Yep, make himself out to be the Son of God. How did Jesus respond to Pilate's claim of authority in verse 11? Here. And power comes from above, right? What did the soldiers do with Jesus' garments? Yep. Who stood by the cross of Jesus? Yeah, the Marys, right? And what were Jesus' final words? It is finished, right? Who asked Pilate for the body of Jesus? Right. John 20. Who found the stone taken away at the tomb? And who did she go tell? Peter and the other disciple, right? What did Peter see when he arrived at the tomb? I didn't hear who said something. The stone was rolled away. What did he see inside? Yeah, all he saw was the linen clothes, right? Didn't see anything else. Right. That's right. That's right. What was the reaction of the other disciple who went in for Peter, or after Peter? He now believed, right, after he saw what he did. What did the disciples not yet understand, according to verse 9? about Jesus? What did they not understand? Yeah, he must rise again from death. Who did Mary see sitting in the tomb? Verse 12. 2 angels. Who did Mary first mistaken Jesus for? The gardener. What single word did Jesus say that made Mary recognize Jesus? His voice, right? Saying Mary. What did Mary Magdalene then tell the disciples about Jesus? I've seen him, that's right. What was Thomas's response to hearing the disciples say, we have seen the Lord? So, did he ever believe? He did, right? And towards the verse 31, why were all these things written for us? That way you may believe, exactly. John 21, where did Jesus show himself again to the disciples? Verse 1. And what did Jesus tell the disciples to do when he stood there on the shore as they were fishing? Yeah, put your nets on the right side. And what was the result? Oh, you stole my other question. Yeah, caught a lot of fish and ended up being how many? 153, right. What did Peter do when he heard that it was the Lord that was speaking? Well, he jumped in the sea, right? Yep. Right. What did the disciples know? What did I can't read my writing, sorry. What did the disciples know after Jesus invited them to come and eat? What did they know about, or what did they say that they knew about the Lord? That he was the Lord, right? I didn't phrase that right, sorry about that. How many times did Jesus show himself up to this point to the disciples? Yeah, verse 14, that's his third time. What question did Jesus ask Peter 3 times? Do you love me? What was Jesus' command to Peter? In verse 17. Feed my sheep. And what were the final words Jesus spoke to Peter here in this chapter? Verse 19. Follow me, right? All right, good job. We'll pick up the rest next week. Chris, all yours.
Before we get started, Jim, do you mind leading us in a word of prayer? Amen. All righty. So last week we had talked about how to study prophecy, and so that kind of just naturally leads into what we're going to be talking about this morning, where we're going to be talking about how to study apocalyptic literature. And when we talk about apocalyptic literature, the most familiar, I think, book that fits into this category is the book of Revelation. But it's important to understand that there are other books in the Bible that also fit this category, and we'll be talking more about it. Revelation, I do want to highlight. Can you click, Shane? It's not advancing. So Revelation and these other apocalyptic books were written to be understood. I think that's important for us to understand, because a lot of times people look at these books as almost unknowable, or it's just super difficult to understand. And if God didn't want us to understand these books, why did he give them to us? And so one of the things that we'll see, there we go, perfect. One of the things that you're going to see a lot, like we talked about with prophecy, is there's going to be a lot of symbolism. And the symbols that are being used are going to be familiar to their audience. And they're going to be things that they're able to look at and go, okay, I kind of see what's happening here. And the message is meant to encourage faithful readers. That it's meant to comfort them, not confuse them. And so the big idea that we're going to be focused on this morning is that apocalyptic literature reveals God's victory through powerful imagery. Because in these books, we're going to be talking about how they are written to people who are in crisis. They're dealing with difficult situations. And they're going to be dealing with a time period where it seems like God's not being active or God's not speaking to them. And these books are written to give them encouragement, to help them understand, hey, here's what's going on the bigger scale. And we want you to know that God is in control, that God has this in hand. So one of the things that I do want to address up front when talking about apocalyptic literature, I know that's a big word, and we use it to describe a genre of writing. And one of the problems with saying, hey, this is apocalyptic literature, or hey, this is, we have the book of Revelation. Whenever we come to these books, everybody has bias, right? Everybody has like, well, I've studied Revelation and it was crazy, we have these judgments that we've already made, and when we approach these books, it's very difficult for us to not impose our own judgments or our own ideas on the text and on the ancients. And so one of the things, as always, that we have to do first is we have to try to understand the original context in which they're written so that we can see what it meant to them first. So the word apocalyptic, what does apocalyptic mean? It's from the Greek word apokalypsos, and it simply means an uncovering. So again, that kind of helps us understand the point of the book. It's an uncovering, it's an unveiling, it's a revealing to us. It's not something that's meant to hide. And it's going to be showing us these spiritual realities that may not be evident on the surface. For example, you go through the book of Daniel and you get to the later part of Daniel and you see all this symbolism and imagery, and what Daniel is being told, because Daniel's standing at the beginning of a new era in Jewish history, that they're going to be going through a lot of political upheaval. There's a lot of nation overthrowing other nation. There's a lot of grand change. And Daniel's told, hey, this is what's going to happen, not so that they can start playing a part in the politics, but so that they understand what's happening, what God is doing, how God is working on behalf of Israel to help them. And he's showing them their part in it. Because all of that happens during the 400 years of silence. We don't have any revelation during that time period that Daniel talks about. And so it helps us as we look at these things to understand God's showing, he's peeling back the curtain a little bit for us to look at. Let's go to Revelation chapter 1. We're going to go to Revelation chapter 1. And can someone read verses 1 through 3? So these three verses lay out the context for the book of Revelation, right? It's the revelation of Jesus to whom? Who's it written to? Yeah, to his bondservants, to his saints, and it's regarding what? Yeah, the things that would soon take place. So again, it's written to them in their situation. And why is it written to them? Give them comfort. Verse 3, blessed is he who reads, to hear the words of the prophecy, and heeds the things which are written, for the time is near. And so again, it's this showing them what's happening so they'll know how to be faithful. Absolutely, yes. And it's written to those, as we see, there's 7 letters written to the 7 churches of Asia, and the whole book is written to them. That they're the original audience, and they're sharing a common crisis during that time. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. A little bit more on apocalyptic literature. It often includes visions, dreams, symbolic imagery, angelic interpreters, cosmic scenes, dramatic contrast between good and evil, and all of these things are designed to reveal a spiritual truth, to help us see what's really important. And again, we can get caught up trying to look at all the symbols, and we can get caught up trying to look at all the, this is standing for that, and we can end up missing the bigger story, missing the forest for the trees. And so apocalyptic literature reveals truth through imagery, okay? What the biggest thing that's going to come in handy when you read Daniel, when you read Revelation, when you read these books, is having a sense of imagination, being able to see these pictures. And one of the most helpful things that I've seen teachers do in going through the book of Revelation, especially with younger kids, is just have them draw what they're reading, being able to picture what's going on. Because this, keeping that sense, okay, we're looking at the images, it keeps us from misreading the genre. All right, any questions so far? All right, your first Kahoot question for the morning. What best describes apocalyptic literature? Is it the timeline of future events? Is it hidden predictions about modern nations? Is it a mysterious code? Or is it a symbolic genre that reveals spiritual truth? Yeah, it's a symbolic genre that reveals spiritual truth. So we talked about there's symbolism, and so the question that comes up is, well, why is it that God uses so much symbolism? What's going on here? Symbols are used to communicate truth powerfully, memorably, across cultures. You imagine a beast with 7 heads and 7 horns, that kind of pops in your mind. And when you're understanding the stacking of these images, 7 heads, 7 horns, it's this idea of power on top of power. It's saying this is somebody that just seems unbeatable. And so it's helping us grasp these spiritual realities. And remember, I said these are all connected to a time of crisis. These are written during times of crisis. In the book of Revelation, one of the big debates that people have in talking about the book of Revelation is, well, when is it written? Is it written, and to whom is it written? Or where was it written from? There are some that say it's written in AD 70 about Jerusalem and the destruction of Jerusalem. Some people say it's written in AD 96 and it's written about Rome. Some say it's written in AD 70 and it's written about Rome. And what people are trying to do is they're trying to place it in the context of the crisis to help people understand. By understanding that crisis that's going on, looking and seeing, okay, this is what's happening, it helps to then better see, okay, so that's how this symbol's being used. And one of the things that is important to see is it's revealing these things through visions, dreams, symbolic imagery, and with this revealing, it's usually not just the writer by himself. There's somebody with him. It's usually an angel that's with the writer. And very frequently, there's dialogue between the two. John will say, "What is this?" And the angel will say, "Well, it's this, and this represents this." There's help being given to the writer to interpret what's happening. So I'm going to extend that just a little bit. If the inspired writer, in seeing these visions, is asking, "Hey, what's going on here?" and the angel is saying, "This is what's happening," if he's needing divine help to interpret what he's seeing, how much more so should we be cautious about saying, "Well, I know for certain that this image here is representative of this government here"? You know, we want to be careful, and we want to respect the text. We want to make sure that we're approaching it, as we've highlighted so many times before, with humility. I've studied the book of Revelation many times, and I'm not going to say, you know, it's absolutely this way, and you got to look at it my way. I think looking at the text and reasoning together is going to be one of the best ways we can have good discussion. But what I want to highlight here is that these messages are meant to encourage God's people during suffering, during a time where it's perceived that God is being silent and that God is not doing much. These books are written to show us God is very much active here, and he's still in control, and his victory is certain. And so, looking at these books, I mentioned to Chris last week on Wednesday during class that the book of Revelation has more references to the Old Testament than it has verses in the book. It is very rich in Old Testament symbolism. And they're going to draw from familiar books like Daniel, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Zechariah. That doesn't mean that they're used in exactly the same way. So just because you see one image in Daniel used one way, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's exactly what it means in the book of Revelation. We're having that familiar imagery drawn on to help us connect with these ideas. And so Revelation is going to build on those ideas. Any comments, thoughts, questions so far? I know I'm kind of going fast.
You're exactly right. I think it's like 417 verses.
Yeah, it's a lot. And that's one of those things that going through the book of Revelation and seeing these images, sometimes there's images that are used and we're like, and we may not catch what it's drawing from, too. And so symbols, again, the symbols are meant to be understood. They're a familiar touching point for us so that we can grasp the message, because that's the goal. So if we're spending our time just constantly decoding the message, again, we can get hyper-focused and end up missing what's going on. Okay. Next Kahoot question. Why does apocalyptic literature use symbols? Is it to hide meaning from persecutors? Is it to provide secret prediction? Is it to create mystery? Or is it to communicate truth powerfully and memorably? Yeah, it's to communicate truth powerfully and memorably. You know, one of the things that is very evident in the book of Revelation that John writes, he tells them, you're going to suffer. You're going to face persecution. People are going to put you to death. He's not hiding anything from the persecutors. Anyone can pick up the book of Revelation and see the imagery being used and how it's being used. One of the things I mentioned last week was not only is there a ton of Old Testament imagery, there's a lot of Roman imagery. Like the idea of a door being put before them that will be open and no one can shut. That's a reference to one of the Roman temples, the Temple of War, that they would only shut the doors during times of peace. And so it's this idea of, well, God's going to make war against Rome. So talking about the purpose of the book of Revelation, talking about that historical setting, I know some people were hoping I was going to say, okay, it's this city and this time. We want to kind of step back just a little bit and show Revelation was written to Christians facing persecution. What kind of persecution was that? You know, some say it's an official persecution under Nero. Some say it's a social persecution under Domitian. The idea is that there is pressure being put on these people to conform, to fit in, to hide, to not be the distinct, righteous people that God has called them to be. And they're facing a time when they're not sure what's ahead, and God's writing to them saying, I'm in control. I've already won, as a matter of fact. I've already won, and all you have to do is be faithful. And so it's written to give them that strength. Faithful unto death. The one who's faithful unto death will receive a crown of life. And so Revelation's main message is Christ reigns. Evil will not prevail. Despite how dramatic it looks, despite how powerful the enemy looks, how terrible things seem, God's already won. And you know, I think that's one of the tools Satan really tries to use to mislead people. He tries to make himself seem powerful, that he tries to make his side seem so strong, so insurmountable. And the book of Revelation drives home one very important fact. It's not even a close battle. Christ has already won. The battle's already over. God's in control. And all we need to do is endure faithfully. And so Revelation is a book of assurance, not anxiety. One of the reasons we're focusing so much on Revelation is because it's the main style of apocalyptic literature. That we see some of this style in these Old Testament books like Daniel, like Zechariah, like Isaiah. But it's a little bit different, and that's why I tend to put them more in books of prophecy rather than apocalyptic literature.
Not this slide, but your last slide. You could take Revelation out, and you could put Isaiah or any of those books that Revelation references so much, and they have the same message. It's a little bit different package. Like you're saying, the idea of God being in control, evil will not overcome you, my plans are going to succeed to the
Mm-hmm.
That's the message of the Bible. That's not just the message of Revelation.
Yeah, to see Isaiah and Revelation, because Isaiah is written before the coming of Christ, before the establishment of the church. Revelation is showing Christ came, the church is here, we're looking for the future reward. Yeah. Okay, so your next Kahoot question, we're moving through here pretty quickly. What was the primary purpose of the book of Revelation? Is it to predict modern political events, to provide detailed future timeline, to encourage faithful Christians during persecution, reveal hidden historical codes? Yeah, it's to encourage faithful Christians during persecution. So in looking through the lesson and we're gonna look at some of the questions that we have in the book, questions for consideration. What dangers arise when texts like Revelation or Daniel are treated primarily as prediction charts? What are some of the dangers of that? Misinterpretation.
You have to spread, sometimes you have to spread the things that are happening in the real world to match up with what the author is trying to describe or pass on to right on.
Yeah. Sometimes we have to either stretch the text or stretch the event to kind of shoehorn them in together. And one of the reasons why I don't take a super hard and fast stand on the book of Revelation when it was written and where it was written about is because even when you're looking at the order of the 10 kings, there's not exactly regardless of the stand that you take. And so it's like, okay, how does that fit? And instead, understanding the 10 kings from a spiritual context, that there is a set time, there is a limit put on this. That helps us better back at the heart. One of the best studies that I've done in the book of Revelation, there was a preacher who approached the book of Revelation from a spiritual standpoint, talking about and highlighting how the book of Revelation tells the gospel story over and over and over again. And it's one of those things that just really helps us grasp, again, that idea of God trying to give us hope and confidence.
Yeah, so I completely agree that if we try to apply modern timelines, try to fit those in, a lot of times that makes misinterpretation. But kind of, as you were saying, the theme of God is in control, those themes are still true today.
Absolutely.
And so when we see crisis going on in the world, when we see persecution in the church, when we see these things, we can still read Revelation and gain confidence and hope and trust that God is still in control, He still loves His people, He's still going to deliver us in the end, those sorts of things. And so I think while the details, we don't want to focus on the details as you're saying, right? But the general themes, I think there's a phrase, inaugurated eschatology, or like already but not yet sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right? That there are prophecies that are absolutely fulfilled and true, but there may be some aspects of those that are yet to be fulfilled and that still need to be fulfilled in the future.
Yeah. And that, again, that idea of we're looking toward heaven. We're looking toward the day of judgment. And the day of judgment for those who trust and believe in Christ, live those faithful lives, the day of judgment is not something to be afraid of. The day of judgment is something to be eagerly anticipated. But for somebody who lives in opposition to the gospel, for someone who lives in defiance of God's will, it's a very fearful thing. And that's why it gets put off, because people don't want to hear it. And I think that's one of the big reasons why so many people misread Revelation as trying to predict the future, trying to lay out, okay, if I see this sign here, then I know it's time for me to turn my life around, because they're looking for that second chance. They're looking for that, hey, I can live however I want until we see the sign, and then, okay, then I'll get my life cleaned up. And that's not what the book of Revelation is about at all. It's about hear it, obey it, be faithful, trust in God. Any other thoughts, comments? I know we're not diving into the book of Revelation, but I'm hopeful that as we go through this lesson, as we go through lesson on Wednesday, it'll give us a little bit more confidence, because I do know that the elders have a plan to study the book of Revelation in the near future. So,
Like you say, the Revelation is not a time seeker of when Jesus is coming back. Jesus said himself, he don't know the day of the hour over the Father. It's funny how man
we get that wrong. We're like, hey, let's try and find the day and the hour.
today and then the day comes and you don't have it.
Yep.
But Jesus said, just be ready, wait for that day. Don't be turn back and be a wicked, and then be like the five
Mm-hmm.
the five virgins.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, from Elijah's talk on Wednesday, he was talking about, you'll hear of wars and rumors of wars, and these are not the signs of the end. These are merely birth pangs. The end is not soon, according to those things. The end will come like a thief in the night.
One other thing I think that used to be confused me with Revelation is it does have a lot of end times language
Mm-hmm.
of like I am coming quickly and things like that when we're talking about the churches. But what I failed to understand when I was younger is a lot of that language is also talking about Jesus coming back in judgment of the nation, right? That we see that in the Old Testament, like the Lord is coming quickly. The Lord is returning. Those are like coming to return in judgment of the nation, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times I would automatically, he's coming quickly, he's coming soon when you read these things. But again, just kind of, I think we need to realize that a lot of times that language is the returning and judgment of nations and things when we're reading these apocalyptic texts as well.
Yes, yes. So looking at reading apocalyptic literature wisely, it's important for us to recognize what's happening, recognize that, the genre, that we're being told things on this big scale with big images, and God's doing that to help us see his activity, see how he is powerfully working for his people. It's important for us to expect that symbolism, and to be able to look and see, okay, he's drawing on the image. What was the main point of this part of Daniel? It was to encourage and give hope, and that's the idea that's being brought forward here. And so to read Revelation, to read these books, you're going to be very much helped by knowing your Old Testament, by knowing the Old Testament imagery, being familiar with the language that's being used, so that you can then more richly draw from the Old Testament. Again, remember the historical context. There's a lot of interpretations out there about Revelation that are of absolutely no comfort and of use to the people that were originally being written to. It's important for us to go back and say, okay, what are they dealing with? We want to see it through their eyes so that we can then have a better context to put it for us now. Chris?
Like you said about the prophecy of Christ, but in Revelation,
Yeah, you have to see, let's say, for example, you understand Revelation to be written during 96 AD, and it's written about Rome. Well, understanding the crisis to those 7 churches, well, what was going on in those 7 churches? There was a revival of the emperor cult. Those 7 churches were sites of these temples that were being built to worship Domitian. And there was intense pressure on them to conform and give homage to Domitian, to treat him as a god. Looking at it through the lens of it's written before 70 AD, it's written about 70 AD, it's written to the church, or written about Jerusalem. What's the comfort there? Well, Jerusalem was facing persecution from Rome. They were about to engage in war, and writing about and telling them, hey, Rome's going to be defeated, even though you're going to be crushed. Well, what do those 7 churches have to understand about Jerusalem? You have to ask those questions, and it helps us understand it a little bit better. But it's important to focus on the message of hope. Last Kahoot question for the morning. What does the word apocalypse mean? Secret prophecy, unveiling, catastrophe, future timeline. Yeah, unveiling. Alrighty. So, apocalyptic literature. It reminds us God is in control. It reminds us that no matter how big evil seems, no matter how out of control the world is, evil will not prevail. God is in control. And Christ is on his throne. Christ wins.
I know it's not the main reasons, but I've heard said that the reason why it was decided is to lead, because, like you said, that the leaders want to be worshiping God. And if they had any kind of literature, you had any kind of literature, going to the churches and spreading it around how they knew God, what God wrote. And if you say anything negative towards the Romans, they kill you right then, But if they start reading, like you said, if you're talking about the beast, different things, the symbol size and stuff that has in there, like this has nothing to do with us. I know it's not the main reason, but
I've heard that before too. And so think about the context of the book of Revelation. And where that idea comes from. It's this idea of fear from persecution. What's Revelation talk about persecution? Do not fear. Don't be afraid. And so that idea of using symbols to hide meaning from the persecutors, it doesn't fit with the purpose of Revelation itself. And the idea that, because we do have highlighted through Revelation that the persecution that happens, God will protect some of his people. So again, it doesn't fit necessarily with that idea. But I can understand why some people think about it, because there is a lot of symbolism. As we read through the book of Revelation, we're like, I'm not quite sure what's going on here. And again, we should approach these studies with humility and understand that what is trying to be accomplished, what God wants us to know, is he wants us to understand, and he wants us to be faithful. So, any other? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, real quick. So I do work in India, mission work, and Christianity is illegal. It's illegal to convert to Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't openly bring in Christian literature into India, right? They'll confiscate it at the border, I won't be able to bring it in, those sorts of things. And so it's possible, I think, maybe that could also be the reason for so that the message could actually reach the people instead of being confiscated by the Romans and things, to be able to actually get to the churches so that they could read it for themselves.
Yeah, and so yeah, I've heard accounts of, for example, people are exposed to Scripture in India, in China, and when they see something, they memorize it as quickly as they can, so that they can have it written on their heart, and it can't be taken away from them. And I think that is such an encouraging thing for us. It's an example for us to learn from about how dear the Word of God is, and how we should treasure it. On Wednesday, Lord willing, we will talk about interpreting symbols responsibly, some common mistakes to avoid, and